She was 6 when she stopped an admiral in his tracks and told him she'd be a naval officer someday. He laughed and gave her his brass pin. 20 years later, she came back in handcuffs. The station smelled like rain and steel, wet concrete, diesel fumes, the faint static crackle of a loudspeaker repeating departure times. A military transport idled on the far platform, its engine humming like a warning. Children clutched stuffed animals. Parents clutched silence. In the middle of it all, Anna Hurley, barefoot and furious, marched toward the man in white. His uniform was pristine, Admiral Ray Edwards, chest stiff with medals, shoulders squared like the sky itself had put him in charge. He was waiting to board the 1310 to Norfolk when she stood in front of him, rain dripping from her tangled hair onto the soaked platform. "You let my brother leave without saying goodbye," she said. Ray blinked, looked around. Was this girl lost? "He's on that train," she said, pointing at the shrinking silhouette of a soldier framed in the window. "I'm gonna be on one too someday. But I won't leave people behind." The admiral crouched, steadying his cap under his arm, and for the first time saw her clearly, tiny, defiant, hurt in the way only children can be. Her dress was too thin for the weather, and her face was too steady for 6 years old. "You planning to join the Navy?" he asked, amused. She nodded like it was law. "Someday I'll outrank you." He laughed, not unkindly, and unclipped the small brass pin from his jacket. "If you still want it when you're grown," he said, "wear this to your interview." She took it like it was a medal. Neither of them knew the pin would one day become federal evidence. Nor that the next time she stood before him, there would be no trains. Only tribunal lights. No rain. Only questions. 20 years later, Anna Hurley returned. Not in uniform, in chains. And the same man who once gave her his name, his promise, and his pin, now sat across from her as a judge. Before we continue, like this video and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more exciting stories that you won't want to miss. The applause echoed like distant thunder against the metal walls of the naval briefing room, polished boots tapping the floor in cadence as rows of officers stood at attention. The promotion banner above the projection screen bore her name, Lieutenant Anna Hurley. Her eyes scanned the crowd, commanders, peers, and analysts, all grinning, all unsuspecting. She tightened the cuffs of her dress uniform, smoothing the crease just below her shoulder tabs, where her new rank would soon be pinned. The brass pin from childhood rested discreetly on her inner lapel, a private reminder beneath layers of protocol. Commander Logan stepped up to the mic, clearing his throat, the air in the room filled with celebration and tension. For her exemplary service in Naval Intelligence, for operations no one will ever be allowed to name, he smiled, we honor Lieutenant Hurley with a promotion to Lieutenant Commander. The room erupted into cheers, boots stomping, a few whistles thrown in. Anna rose slowly, spine straight, every inch the officer she'd trained herself to be. She was 3 steps from the stage when the double doors slammed open. 6 military police officers entered in full tactical gear, faces unreadable behind mirrored visors. The noise died instantly, cheers cut short, celebration suspended in a freeze frame of disbelief. One of them barked, "Lieutenant Anna Hurley, you are hereby detained under Article 106A, espionage." Gasps rippled through the room like shrapnel. Anna didn't move, didn't blink, she simply turned, wrists already outstretched. They shackled her in front of her entire unit, in front of the men and women she'd saved in silence and shadows. Her eyes didn't waver as the MP clipped her ID badge and tucked it into an evidence pouch. Cameras, official and not, captured every second. No one moved to protest. The applause that had echoed seconds before was now a void that swallowed sound and breath alike. The brass pin slipped loose from her inner lapel, landing on the linoleum floor with a sound no one expected to hear. One of the MPs kicked it accidentally, then paused and picked it up, squinting at the antique engraving of an eagle and anchor. "Tag it," the officer muttered. Anna said nothing, not even as they pushed her toward the exit, boots clacking, chains rattling like war drums. Far away in Washington, D.C., in a room lined with dark glass and blinking servers, Admiral Ray Edwards watched the security feed without flinching. The monitor froze on Anna's face, calm, expressionless, but unmistakably her. She hadn't changed much, not in the eyes. He felt something inside him go tight, like a bulkhead sealing shut. He leaned forward, pressing pause as the moment before the cuffs snapped into place filled the screen. "Sir, should we flag this for review?" his aide asked cautiously, voice lowered. Ray didn't answer immediately. The footage had already spread, classified or not. Word traveled fast when it was something like this. The girl from the train station. The one who'd worn rainwater like a medal. "Schedule me for her tribunal," he finally said. "I want to be present." The Pentagon buzzed with speculation. She was a star in intelligence, a codebreaker who'd once cracked an encryption chain no AI could trace. One commander whispered she'd been close to tracking a mole inside NATO's black site ops. Another insisted it was a setup, that she'd uncovered something that made someone important sweat. But gossip was cheap and silence was expensive. Inside the military detention wing, Anna sat alone in a concrete cell under harsh fluorescent light. They hadn't taken her shoes, but they'd taken her pin. She sat on the edge of the cot, back straight, counting each flicker of the overhead bulb like it might mean something. The guards hadn't said a word since locking her in. She wasn't surprised. Ghosts rarely get explanations. Her lawyer arrived 6 hours later, military appointed, jittery, too young. He carried a folder that looked thinner than it should. "Lieutenant Hurley," he began, "you're being charged with espionage and unauthorized distribution of classified information to a foreign entity." She stared at him, unmoving. He swallowed. "They're claiming you routed encrypted traffic through a compromised comms relay in the Black Sea. That the data reached hostile intelligence networks." Anna's voice was quiet but steel. "Which data?" He blinked. "Satellite pings. Deployment rosters. Internal memos flagged red." He shuffled papers. "There's more, but it's sealed pending review." Anna leaned forward. "They're not reviewing it," she said flatly. "They're burying it." Outside the cell block, 2 officers whispered beside a glowing console. She was a ghost. Cleared more ops than anyone under 30. Why would she throw it away? The other shook his head. "Maybe she found something we weren't supposed to know." They didn't realize the hall echoed. Anna heard every word. The tribunal was set for the following week, but the prep had already begun. Ray Edwards received the classified brief the same night, redacted within an inch of meaning. But one file wasn't fully sanitized, a report filed 3 months ago by Anna herself. It detailed activity on a secure Navy server traced to Captain Dunhill, her former superior, and one of the Navy's golden boys. Ray remembered the name. So did his stomach. The report had been flagged inconclusive by Naval Command. Then it was archived. Then Anna filed a second, more aggressive alert. That one disappeared entirely. Ray leaned back in his chair, knuckles whitening. He pulled out the copy of the pin they'd tagged as evidence. He remembered her standing in the rain, finger pointed at him like he was guilty of something the world hadn't discovered yet. "I'll outrank you," she had said. Maybe she already had. Back in the cell, Anna waited. She knew someone would come eventually, not the lawyer, not the press. Someone who remembered. The surveillance camera in the corner blinked red. She stared at it. "Ray," she said softly, "if you're watching, dig deeper." 2 days later, they moved her. Not to trial, not yet, but to interrogation. The room was sterile, metal-lined, monitored from behind mirrored glass. A man in civilian dress sat across from her, his file labeled DOJ Oversight Liaison. She said nothing. He cleared his throat. "Lieutenant Hurley, do you deny that this is your voice print on the intercepted comm logs?" He played a clip. It was short. 12 seconds. Her voice. Calm. Crisp. "Confirm Alpha Shadow Link. Packet routed through Black Ghost. Eyes on compromised NATO node relay down in 60. The DOJ rep stopped the recording. That's a military signal line traced to Project Call. A program not even Naval Intel has top clearance on." He leaned forward. "So either you were there illegally, or you were reporting something illegal." He smiled, as if expecting her to crack. Anna said nothing. The room filled with silence again, a silence Ray Edwards would later describe as the kind that follows a detonation, not a secret. Outside the glass, Ray watched. He'd pushed to be present, and they had let him in as a historical observer. He could see the steel in her. Not defiance, not arrogance, clarity. She wasn't folding. She was waiting for truth to catch up. That night, Ray returned to his quarters and unlocked an encrypted drive. It held messages from a decade ago, early military dispatches, raw data from the Black Sea base, names of junior officers with patterns in their code habits. One of them? Dunhill. A name that had been shadowed even then. But no one had connected the wires. Anna had. And now she was being punished for it. He stared out the window of the Pentagon suite, watching lights blink across the DC skyline like Morse code from a dying world. Somewhere down there, a little girl had grown into something the system couldn't control. And maybe shouldn't. Ray made his decision. Tribunal or not, he'd find the hole in the story. The one Anna had tried to warn them about. The tribunal chamber was colder than Ray remembered, all chrome edges and bulletproof glass, like truth itself was something that had to be contained. The seal of the U.S. Navy glared from the wall behind the panel bench, flanked by flags that whispered in the air conditioning like ghosts. Admiral Ray Edwards sat stiff-backed between Vice Admiral Mendez and Rear Admiral Fallon, hands folded on the polished desk, a knot grinding behind his breastbone. The prosecution table was already stacked with files, thick, red-tabbed, sealed tight like coffins. At the defense table sat Lieutenant Anna Hurley, wrists free but posture iron straight, her expression unreadable. She hadn't spoken a word since entering the room, not even to her court-appointed attorney, who looked as overwhelmed as a cadet on his first deployment. Ray studied her in silence, watching her eyes, not defiant, not broken, just waiting. The press was barred from the hearings, but everyone in the Pentagon already knew the story. A rising star accused of treason, a tech-savvy officer turned traitor. They called her the Silent Spook, now an ironic title for a woman who had once taught entire task forces how to listen better. "This tribunal will now come to order," Mendez said, his voice sharp enough to slice a chain of command. The lead prosecutor stood. Lieutenant Commander Henry Dale was a career litigator, Navy to the bone, and he smelled blood. "What we have, gentlemen," he began, pacing before the bench, "is a breach so severe, it undermines every operation we've run in the past decade." He held up a black folder sealed with a gold band. These logs, routed through offshore networks, contain encryption keys used only in black site comms. He paused for effect, gaze landing on Anna. Keys that were traced to this officer's clearance badge and used during her active deployment in SecNav operations 3 months ago. Anna's lawyer didn't object. He didn't speak at all. Ray's jaw ticked once. He'd seen kids thrown into courts before, but this felt different. This wasn't just over-prepared prosecution. This was theater, and the script had been written before she even entered the room. Furthermore, Dale continued, "We have time-stamped logins to secure terminals, session traces left inside multi-node bounce relays, information that was cross-verified against NATO cyber forensics." He dropped another exhibit onto the table with a clap. Her voice print was captured on an intercept transmission to an unregistered node operating near the Black Sea. The screen behind him lit up with a waveform, spikes and valleys, the unmistakable signature of Anna's voice. Her own words, packet routed, black ghost, compromised NATO node. The silence that followed was deafening. Still, Anna didn't flinch. Ray leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing. He'd heard the intercept before, in the pre-brief packet sent days prior. Something about the cadence was off. Too perfect. Too clean. He made a mental note to check the raw file. During the recess, Ray kept his distance from the other panel members, choosing instead to walk the edge of the observation deck where junior officers took notes through one-way glass. His fingers brushed the inside of his coat pocket, where the brass pin Anna's pin was kept in a small evidence pouch. A child's promise, now state property. "You okay, sir?" one of the observers asked, catching the tension in his knuckles. Ray didn't answer. Anna's lawyer finally spoke during the second hearing, voice quiet and hesitant. Your Honors, we submit that my client may have been used without her knowledge, possibly as a cutout, a buffer for a leak that originated elsewhere. Dale didn't even hide his smirk. Speculation doesn't hold up against classified packet logs and access audits, Counselor. The lawyer sat down like someone drowning. Anna didn't look at him. Behind closed doors that evening, Ray combed through the tribunal files again, this time alone in the decryption chamber 2 floors beneath the Pentagon's East Wing. He bypassed his own clearance restrictions with an override he hadn't used in years, logging into the metadata of the audio file submitted by the prosecution. The embedded timestamps had anomalies, 3 microsecond gaps that shouldn't exist unless the file had been remastered. Someone cleaned this, he muttered aloud, his breath fogging the glass. Someone had tampered with the recording. The next morning, Anna was brought into the private holding chamber for her first permitted visit. Ray stood on the other side of the glass door, arms behind his back, no uniform, just a plain shirt and civilian slacks. She was seated already, chained to the table but not slouched, her spine straight as a blade. The guards exited quietly, and the room buzzed into sealed silence. Only then did she look up. He took the seat across from her, slowly, deliberately, eyes never leaving hers. You remember what you said at that station? He asked. Her brow twitched just slightly. He pulled the pouch from his pocket and set it on the table between them. You said you'd outrank me one day. Her eyes dropped to the brass pin. You almost did. Anna inhaled once, shallow and controlled. They want a name, she said, finally. And you don't have it yet. Ray nodded. Not yet. But I've seen the gaps. The audio's doctored. The metadata's been wiped in a way only someone deep in Naval Intel would know how to do. I filed 2 warnings, Anna said. The first got flagged. The second disappeared. She looked up again. They buried it. So I buried it deeper. Ray leaned forward. What does that mean? Anna's jaw set. It means I rerouted the packet to a ghost node. My node. Then I waited for them to come looking. When they did, I'd know who was watching. She tilted her head. Now I know. Ray's pulse ticked in his throat. Who is it? She smiled without humor. Check Captain Dunhill's last satellite trace. Back in the tribunal room, the hearings resumed, but Ray's mind was already moving elsewhere. He wrote a silent note on his tablet, flagged under priority encryption. Pull all Dunhill pings. Last 90 days. Shadow logs only. His aide passed the note without asking questions. Ray felt the tide shifting. At lunch, Ray reviewed Dunhill's recent activity logs, or what should have been activity logs. Instead, there were 34 dead pings, all marked retrieved from a secure server 2 days before Anna's arrest. All from a blacklisted IP known to be used by foreign intelligence proxies. He felt something cold settle in his chest. The next day, during a brief recess, Ray approached Anna's counsel in private. Tell her to hold the line, he said quietly. Help is coming. The lawyer blinked. She thinks no one believes her. Ray's voice dropped to a whisper. Then make sure she knows someone does. The prosecution tried to tighten the noose during the afternoon session. They played the same voice clip again, louder this time, hoping volume would substitute for doubt. But Ray watched the court reporter flinch, just slightly, at the waveform spike. Even she heard it now. Something was wrong. When the day's hearing adjourned, Ray stepped out into the corridor, exhausted but electric. Sir, his aide caught up, breathless. We found it. He held out a report. A hidden node inside one of the data caches from Dunhill's last Black Ops drop. A log file inside. Ray opened the document. It was brief, but damning. It named 3 high-ranking intelligence officers. Included Anna's name as a buffer link. Suggested she had been marked for discreditation in case the operation was exposed. The final line read, If she talks, she burns. If she burns, so does the rest of us. Ray closed the file slowly. The pin in his pocket felt heavier than steel. Back in the holding room, Anna sat cross-legged on the cot, her uniform jacket draped over her knees. A knock echoed. The guard opened the door. You have 5 minutes. She looked up to see her attorney holding a folder, and behind him, walking silently, Admiral Ray Edwards. Anna stood slowly. Ray handed her the printed log without a word. She scanned it. Her hands didn't tremble, but her eyes closed for one long second. When they opened, she looked at him and said, "Then I hope you're ready to go to war." What would you do if the very system you vowed to protect turned on you? Do you think Anna was right to act outside the chain of command, or should she have followed orders and trusted the system? Leave your thoughts in the comments, or subscribe so you don't miss where Anna's ghosts go global. The first time Anna noticed the anomaly, it was just a blip on a spreadsheet, a shift in deployment schedules so minor it looked like clerical error. A single unit reassigned to a region they'd already cleared, flagged under a secondary command channel that didn't match the logged chain of command. She blinked at it twice, ran it through the secure verification protocol, and chalked it up to poor reporting. But 2 days later, it happened again, this time with different units in a different theater, shadowed by a satellite signature that wasn't on the official mission manifest. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as a slow, creeping chill settled under her collar. Anna sat at the cyber operations desk, a dark room bathed in blue light from 10 glowing screens. Her clearance was high, not the highest, but enough to peer into the bones of the Navy's most protected systems. She pulled the satellite identifiers and traced their pings. Nothing should have come back. But she got hits, once over the Black Sea, once in disputed Arctic waters, and again near the Horn of Africa. They were bouncing signals through a dead relay node, one officially decommissioned in 2013. She flagged it internally, routing a preliminary report through the Naval Signals Intelligence channel under priority classification. 36 hours passed. No response. Just a quiet archive tag tucked beneath a layer of digital red tape. She rechecked the node history and found the edits, small, subtle changes to timestamp metadata. Someone was covering the trail. It was Captain Dunhill who pulled her aside that week, catching her outside the west elevator after shift change. He was older, silver-haired but agile, with the calm authority of someone who had seen too many things and survived them all. "You've been digging," he said, no accusation in his tone. "And someone's noticed." Anna hesitated. "Then why haven't they shut me down?" He smiled without smiling. "They don't need to, not if they're planning something worse." Back in his office, the lights low and the windows shielded, Dunhill poured 2 fingers of whiskey into a ceramic mug and pushed it toward her. He gestured to the chair. "You're not wrong," he said, pulling up his own console and sliding a folder across the table. "I've seen the same patterns. Shadow deployments. Off-the-books notes. Unregistered asset movements." Anna scrolled through his files, raw data, intercepted pings, closed-door memos marked for strategic oversight only. It was real. "Then why hasn't anyone done anything?" she asked. Dunhill leaned forward. "Because the rot's not just at the bottom. It's higher than your clearance allows you to see." Anna frowned. "Then we reported up the chain." Dunhill's voice dropped. "You ever see what happens to people who shake the chain, Lieutenant?" He tapped the folder. "Play long enough to expose the game. Just don't get caught playing it." From that day on, Anna became 2 versions of herself. The one who submitted reports and attended briefings like a good officer, and the one who stayed late, traced ghost signals, and slowly mapped the network of corruption stretching like veins beneath the Navy's skin. She cross-checked deployment logs with post-action reports. Mismatches piled up. Units were being moved under false pretenses, sometimes for missions that didn't exist. What terrified her more was that she could no longer trace who authorized the moves. Orders were being scrubbed and rewritten retroactively. Her own access had been cloned. She found digital fingerprints that mirrored her ID. She was being framed in slow motion. Still, she kept digging. Then Dunhill vanished. No warning. No reassignment. No debrief. One day he was in command. The next day his office was locked and cleared. The official story said medical leave. But Anna knew the language of vanishing. This wasn't leave, this was cleanup. Her hands shook as she accessed his restricted logs one final time. The files were empty. Wiped clean. Not even residual cache. She checked the last ping from his secure terminal. It had been routed through the same decommissioned node she had flagged weeks before. He had been watching too. And now he was gone. Alone and with the walls closing in, Anna initiated Ghost Protocol, a failsafe she had built quietly over months. It was anchored to the brass pin Admiral Edwards gave her years ago. She'd hollowed it, retrofitted it with a low-frequency tracking chip, the kind used before the military switched to smart fiber patches. A relic no one would expect. A decoy. A trap. The pin was more than a symbol now, it was a silent signal node, tuned to a ghost network only she could see. She embedded a dead man switch. If she were arrested, disappeared, or killed, the pin would ping a secure vault buried behind 3 layers of failover encryption. The vault contained her compiled files, redacted reports, ghost satellite trails, node location maps. It was her insurance policy. And she made sure to wear the pin every day. The tribunal didn't know it yet, but they had already triggered the ping. Ray Edwards sat in his office as the encrypted packet arrived. It didn't come through any of the secure Navy networks. It came through an old DOS-based subchannel, something he hadn't seen in 20 years. The file attached was labeled "Truth is a chain you pull." Inside were raw logs. Dozens. Hundreds. And a voice recording. Dunhill's voice. "If you're hearing this, I've already been burned. The rabbit hole goes deep. Anna's not your leak. She's the tripwire they're trying to cut. Find the packet logs buried in black node X-ray. It'll point you to who's really moving pieces." Ray felt like the air had been yanked from the room. The following day, the tribunal resumed, same cold room, same hard seats. Anna sat still, her eyes scanning every expression. She could feel it. Something was shifting, like a current changing under the water before the surface ever ripples. Ray requested a closed session, citing new classified materials of potential exculpatory value. The panel approved it. The moment the room cleared, he activated the wall screen and played the audio. Dunhill's voice filled the air. The panelists stiffened. Fallon leaned forward. "Where did you get this?" Ray didn't blink. "Through an old node Anna designed. One the rest of us forgot existed." Vice Admiral Mendez opened the folder Ray provided. His brows knit slowly as he scanned the files, access logs rewritten after the fact, false pings rerouted through enemy IPs that traced back to internal servers. "She was bait," Mendez murmured. And the brass swallowed it. Anna was brought back into the room. For the first time, her eyes met Ray's, and something passed between them. Not gratitude. Not even relief. Just recognition. "This tribunal finds cause to suspend current proceedings pending investigation," Mendez declared. "Lieutenant Hurley, you will remain in protective holding. Your lawyer will be granted access to the new materials." Ray closed the file. The war wasn't over, but the shadows were thinning. That night, as Anna was escorted back to her cell, she passed the same one-way glass that once watched her without blinking. She smiled. Just a little. Inside her pocket, the brass pin hummed once. A heartbeat. A signal. A promise kept. Admiral Ray Edwards sat alone in the archives sublevel of the Pentagon, long past midnight, surrounded by silence and a flood of classified files no one else dared to open. The decrypted packet Anna's pin had activated now sat on a secure drive in his hand, its data so volatile it wasn't just redacted, it was erased from official existence. Line after line of metadata revealed inconsistencies in deployment directives, command sign-offs that didn't match timestamps, and access logs with forged clearance stamps. Someone had threaded lies through the fabric of the system, and no one had noticed. Or worse, someone had noticed and buried it anyway. Ray leaned forward, cross-checking one more set of command keys. The access logs tied every altered troop movement to one originating source, Captain Nathan Dunhill. But what chilled Ray wasn't just Dunhill's signature, it was who he was routing the data to. Not a foreign adversary in the traditional sense, but a rogue cell operating inside NATO, with back-channel deals, privatized conflict interests, and shadow contracts worth billions. Dunhill hadn't just been leaking intel. He had been orchestrating more. Pulling the troop rosters, Ray noticed something else. The units Dunhill rerouted weren't just misplaced, they had been sent into high-risk zones with no backup. Dozens had died under the guise of training accidents or tactical missteps. Their loss reports were all signed off by the same names commanders who now sat on oversight boards, shielded by decades of bureaucratic power. Anna hadn't uncovered a leak. She had stumbled into a multinational ghost operation, and they'd tried to erase her for it. His pulse quickened. If Anna had been the tripwire, Dunhill had been the detonator, and someone else had built the bomb. The names attached to the funding logs weren't military at all. They were private. A consulting firm tied to defense contracts in Eastern Europe, with clients in 5 NATO member states and shadow ties to a company Ray remembered from a Senate subcommittee scandal over 15 years ago. It was all connected, every thread, every lie. And Anna had walked right into the crosshairs. He returned to his secure office before dawn, eyes raw, his uniform jacket slung carelessly over the back of the chair. The sun wasn't up yet, but the building buzzed with the low hum of operations that never stopped. Ray summoned a level 5 encrypted channel and called in 3 names from his personal contact list, men he trusted, barely. "I found the source," he told them. "And it's not Hurley." They didn't argue. They just asked for proof. He sent the data packet stripped down, redacted enough to protect Anna but damning enough to open doors. But within the hour, his screen lit up with a level 6 override message. "Access denied. National security review in progress. Stand down immediately." He sat back, heart pounding. The door to the truth was closed, not because it was wrong, but because it was dangerous. 2 hours later, he was summoned to a classified roundtable meeting under the pretense of discretionary internal intelligence review. He entered the chamber to find Vice Admiral Mendez, Rear Admiral Fallon, and 2 civilian representatives from the National Intelligence Directorate already seated. A silence fell over the room like a guillotine. "Ray," Mendez began carefully, "we've received word of your independent investigation into the Hurley case." Ray didn't speak. He simply placed the data drive on the table. "This drive contains evidence of falsified orders, ghost troop movements, and a covert intelligence operation routed through NATO's internal systems," he said, his voice flat. "It was orchestrated by Dunhill. Possibly others. And Hurley was their scapegoat." One of the civilians picked up the drive with gloved fingers, as if it might explode. "We've reviewed some of your findings," he said coolly. "But these allegations, if pursued publicly, could destabilize alliance integrity and fracture operational trust with NATO partners." Ray's knuckles whitened against the table's edge. "You're saying we should bury it?" The civilian offered a measured smile. "We're saying you've done your duty. And now it's time to consider national unity." Fallon added quietly, "Exposing this could burn more than Dunhill. It could unravel command threads that lead directly to the Joint Chiefs." Mendez avoided his eyes. "Sometimes silence is the higher service." Ray stood slowly. "And sometimes silence is cowardice." He walked out of that room knowing 2 things. First, the system didn't want justice. And second, they would come for Anna again. They couldn't risk her being alive, aware, or credible. She was too close. Too dangerous. He had to move before they did. He found her in the holding wing, staring through the 1-inch window slot in her door as if it might blink back. The guards stepped aside without protest. Word of the shifting tide was already spreading like smoke. Anna turned as he entered, expression unchanged. But something in her eyes flickered when she saw him standing there, unflinching. "You found it," she said. It wasn't a question. Ray nodded. "I found him. And who he worked for. And why they needed you gone." She tilted her head. "And?" His jaw clenched. "They told me to bury it." Her gaze darkened. "Of course they did." He stepped closer. "Anna, this thing is radioactive. You blow it up the wrong way and we lose more than rank. We lose leverage. Allies. Lives." She took a breath. "Then we expose it the right way." He stared at her. She stared back. Neither blinked. "You still have the pin?" he asked. She pulled it from her pocket slowly, setting it on the table between them. "It's still broadcasting," she said. "Still pointing to the vault." Ray picked it up. "Then it's time we turn the signal somewhere else." She raised an eyebrow. "Where?" He smiled for the first time in days. "To someone who doesn't answer to anyone." Over the next 48 hours, Ray used the last of his unrestricted access to package the data into a new file, this one stripped of classified tags and framed as a whistleblower report, protected under the National Security Transparency Act. He couldn't file it through military channels, they were already compromised. But he knew someone else who could. A journalist. An old war correspondent turned investigative analyst with connections in the right kinds of dark corners. The story broke on the third morning, headlines splashed across defense forums, leaked to congressional aides, flagged by civilian watchdogs within minutes. NATO Ghost Unit exposed. Internal sources confirm U.S. officer used as political decoy. Ray didn't name Anna in the release. But he didn't have to. The court of public opinion didn't take long to connect the dots. The Pentagon was on fire by noon. Emergency meetings. Phone calls from foreign defense ministers. Whispered threats about loss of strategic credibility. Anna was pulled from holding and placed in protective custody. Her status changed from charged officer to asset of interest. They couldn't silence her anymore, not without making her a martyr. Ray stood on the balcony outside the tribunal wing, watching the chaos bloom from the center of the institution he'd served his entire life. His hands were steady, but his chest ached. He'd broken every rule that made him who he was. And still, it felt like justice had barely touched the surface. Anna joined him quietly, arms crossed, hair tied back tight. "You good?" she asked. He looked at her. "No," he said. "But I'm right." She nodded. "Then that'll do. If exposing corruption meant losing everything you've built, your rank, your career, even your safety, would you still do it? Why or why not? Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss where the fallout gets deadly. The encrypted file hit the journalist's inbox at 3:17 a.m. Eastern Time. No signature. No traceable IP. Just a subject line that read, "You said you wanted the truth." Here it is. Inside the folder were two things: a digital vault containing records of covert NATO operations and a recorded statement from an anonymous military official. The audio was distorted, voice masked, but the message was clear. This isn't a rogue officer's crime. This is a machine cleaning up after itself. By the time the first article went live on Atlas Insider, a mid-level military blog with a reputation for whistleblower features, it had already been mirrored on 17 international feeds. The story exploded across timelines and encrypted forums like gunpowder meeting flame. Military cover-up unveiled, NATO intelligence ring exposed. Subheadings named high-ranking officials and leaked redacted logs detailing troop movements manipulated for private gains. Buried in the metadata, just deep enough for the right readers to find, was a line connecting Captain Nathan Dunhill to Black Ops trafficking networks routed through shell corporations across Eastern Europe. Within hours, the article had 5 million views. The hashtag started trending by mid-morning, #GhostProtocol, #AnnaWasRight, #WarForProfit. Congressional aides forwarded the report to senior staffers. Journalists showed up at the Pentagon gates. Former service members posted cryptic "I knew it" messages from burner accounts. But what made the system truly panic was that the leak had receipts, audio, maps, internal audits, and fragments of conversations never meant to be heard. At the heart of the storm, Admiral Ray Edwards sat alone in his office, the room strangely silent despite the chaos flooding the institution around him. The phone had rung 9 times since sunrise, he hadn't answered once. Instead, he watched the news ticker scroll across his monitor, listening to reporters dissect a system he'd spent his whole life protecting. "They'll call you a traitor for this," a voice said behind him. It was Mendez, standing in the doorway, eyes hard. Ray didn't turn. They already did. By noon, an internal security team escorted Ray from his wing. No cuffs. No confrontation. Just a silent resignation letter and a statement from Naval Command thanking him for his years of honorable service and announcing his early retirement effective immediately. He left without ceremony, the brass pin still in his coat pocket untouched. Outside the Pentagon, a half-dozen journalists tried to mob him, cameras flashing, microphones extended. He said nothing. Meanwhile, Inside the detention facility 2 blocks away, Lieutenant Anna Hurley sat on the edge of a cot that was no longer bolted to the floor. Her cell door opened just after noon, no warning, no escort. A legal officer entered first, followed by 2 MPs who didn't touch their restraints. "The tribunal has suspended sentencing," the officer said. "You're being returned to active testimony." Anna stood slowly, her muscles stiff from days in isolation. "What changed?" she asked. The officer didn't answer. As she was escorted through the corridors, Anna caught whispers between the guards, phrases like, "Did you see the file?" and "They're burning Dunhill's name out of the records." She kept walking, shoulders squared, boots echoing off the concrete like a heartbeat. The steel doors ahead slid open, and for the first time in days, she stepped into light. It wasn't freedom, not yet, but it wasn't silence either. And silence, she had learned, was the enemy of truth. The tribunal reconvened in a sealed chamber now equipped with a bank of secured feeds broadcasting the session to a classified congressional oversight committee. Anna sat at the defense table once more, but this time without cuffs or handlers whispering at her side. Her military-appointed attorney had been replaced by an independent counsel, a woman with hawk eyes and scars from old courtroom wars. "You've got 30 minutes, she'd told Anna before the doors opened. "Make every word count." They're listening now. And they're afraid. Across the room, the panelists looked different, not in appearance, but in posture. Where there had once been stone faces and rehearsed indifference, there was now caution. Wariness. The realization that if they handled this wrong, they'd be the next names leaked to the press. Ray wasn't there, he wasn't allowed. But his fingerprints were all over the sudden shift in tone. Anna took the stand with the calm of someone who had already died a dozen different ways, in isolation, in silence, in betrayal. "Lieutenant Hurley," the lead judge began, "you've been given this opportunity to explain your actions in light of new evidence." She met his gaze. "Then let me start at the beginning." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It cut through the room like a scalpel. She laid it all out, the anomalies in the troop deployments, the ghost satellites, the backdoor encryption keys. She named Dunhill, not as a traitor, but as someone who gave her enough time to follow the thread. "He knew they were watching," she said. "He knew they'd frame me. So he disappeared before they could use him too." The panel remained quiet, scribbling notes, avoiding her eyes. Then she described the pin. How she had embedded it with a transmitter. How the ping triggered a hidden vault containing logs, reports, and voice memos. How the vault had been configured to send the data not to command, but to someone who wouldn't ignore it. "Because I didn't trust the system," she said. "And now, neither should you." They asked about the voice recordings, the one that caught her routing a black ghost packet. She confirmed it was her voice. "But I wasn't leaking data to the enemy," she said. "I was sending it to myself. Through a ghost relay I built. So when they tried to erase me, the truth would survive me." The room fell silent. One panelist, the youngest, finally looked up. "Lieutenant, do you believe what you did was justified?" Anna didn't blink. "I believe it was necessary." Another leaned in. "Would you do it again?" She smiled, just slightly. "Only faster." By the time the hearing ended, the tribunal hadn't delivered a verdict, but it didn't need to. The real trial had already begun, and it wasn't happening inside this room. It was happening on news tickers, in Senate subcommittees, on encrypted message boards shared by soldiers who now whispered her name like a warning. Anna Hurley wasn't a traitor. She was a mirror. And the system was finally seeing itself. Back in the holding wing, now converted into a temporary quarters with a desk, a cot, and real food, Anna sat alone, reviewing the list of media requests piling up outside the perimeter. She ignored most of them. But she read every message that came in from service members, young officers who said they'd questioned orders before, but never had proof. Veterans who'd seen training accidents that didn't make sense. Analysts who'd been told not to look too closely. She didn't respond. Not yet. But she felt the weight of them like hands on her shoulders. Like armor. Outside, in a small house near the Potomac, Ray stood by the window, watching the sun fade behind the tree line. His phone was off. His inbox full. His future uncertain. but he'd done what mattered. He'd given the truth a voice. And she was finally ready to speak. The chamber was full before the tribunal even called the room to order. Rows of officers lined the benches in pressed uniforms, their posture stiff, eyes wary, like they were waiting for a verdict before it was given. The media hadn't been allowed in, but the presence of congressional observers in the upper gallery changed everything. Anna Hurley walked into the room wearing her Navy uniform, the same one she'd been arrested in, except now it was clean, pressed, and whole. Her wrists still bore the ghost of old bruises, but her stride didn't falter. When she reached the witness stand, no one spoke. Not the panel. Not her new attorney. Not the audience. She placed a single, sealed envelope on the desk in front of her, unrequested, unacknowledged. A quiet declaration. I'm not just here to speak. I'm here to show you everything. The oath was administered quickly, the questions offered gently. But Anna didn't wait for the prompt. She adjusted the mic, leaned slightly forward, and began. I served Naval Intelligence for 10 years, she said. During that time, I worked on drone targeting systems, satellite coordination, encryption monitoring, and forward reconnaissance logs. Her voice was low even. Not cold, controlled. I began to notice inconsistencies in the orders sent to field units, deployment changes that bypass standard command review, she continued. First, it was timing discrepancies. Then unit call signs misfiled. Then full missions redirected through channels that didn't officially exist. She slid the envelope across the table toward the clerk. Inside is my full log history, decrypted, signed, time-stamped, and notarized in secure environments over a period of 18 months. She let the words settle, then added, they told me not to dig. But I did. The tribunal watched in silence. Her attorney didn't interrupt. The gallery was still. Anna kept going. My investigation uncovered unauthorized drone strikes in classified sectors of the Black Sea, operations launched from unregistered platforms controlled via ghost relay systems. She met the panel's eyes. These kills weren't sanctioned by any official directive. And they weren't targeting enemies. They were targeting assets, informants, double agents, liabilities. Whispers erupted in the gallery. One observer leaned forward, gripping the railing. A gavel tapped once, not for silence, but to recenter the room. Anna waited, unshaken. When the sound faded, she continued. I also found evidence of false flag operations, missions constructed to mimic foreign aggression, she said. These incidents were used to justify emergency funding, redirect policy, and escalate military presence in politically advantageous zones. She inhaled slowly, like she'd been holding that breath for years. Men died under the pretense of duty. Families were told lies. Budgets were passed on fabricated threats. She paused. Her eyes scanned the room, not for support, not for approval, but to ensure they were listening. I filed reports. 2 of them. She held up her hand, 2 fingers extended. One was buried. The other was erased. She dropped her hand. Captain Nathan Dunhill was the only one who told me to keep watching. She described Dunhill's mentorship, how he had taught her to trace metadata, how he had warned her without ever speaking the full truth aloud. She told them how he vanished the day after she discovered a black node rerouting encrypted kill lists through a NATO shell firm. It wasn't until I was framed that I understood, she said. They didn't care if I leaked something. They cared that I could prove who did. The clerk began unpacking the envelope at the desk, document after document marked with encryption seals, ID verifications, terminal logs. Each one was admissible. Each one was traceable. Each one was real. The air in the room shifted. Anna pulled something from her inner pocket. The brass pin. She held it up between 2 fingers. This is the same pin Admiral Ray Edwards gave me when I was 6 years old, she said. I embedded a low-frequency transmitter into its shell housing 2 years ago. It served as the dead man's switch for everything I found. When they arrested me, it activated the vault and sent the data to a secure relay. That's how you got it. Someone in the back gasped, the sound sharp, human. The gallery froze again. One tribunal member leaned toward another, whispering. Another simply stared at the documents as if they were radioactive. The youngest panelist cleared her throat. "Lieutenant, can you clarify how many individuals you believe were involved in the cover-up?" Anna didn't hesitate. 27 confirmed. She tapped the desk lightly. 5 civilian contractors. 9 senior officers. 13 ranking intelligence handlers spread across US and NATO channels. A heavy pause followed. Then she added, "And at least 3 of them are in this building right now." The silence became thunderous. One of the older tribunal members sat back, face unreadable. Another suddenly found great interest in their notes. Anna's voice didn't rise, didn't shake. "I didn't sign up to obey. I signed up to protect. That oath doesn't expire when the orders go rotten." She finished with one last statement, her voice soft but piercing. "I know what they'll say. That I went rogue. That I was unstable. But I did what I was trained to do. Not salute. Not obey. But protect." The room held its breath. The lead panelist leaned into the mic. "We are in recess until further notice." The gavel struck. Not a conclusion. A pause. A reckoning deferred. The room erupted in murmurs the moment she was escorted out. As Anna walked the corridor back to the secure wing, officers she didn't recognize stepped aside, not out of fear, but something closer to respect. Her posture didn't falter, though her fingers trembled slightly as she tucked the pin back into her pocket. Behind her, the tribunal chamber buzzed with a new energy, like a current that couldn't be turned off. Inside, they would argue, spin, redact. But outside, the truth was already moving. In a quiet office 3 floors up, a civilian aide closed her laptop and reached for the encrypted line. "We're going to need a contingency plan," she said into the receiver. She just burned the map. On the other end, a voice replied and lit the path. The line went dead. Anna sat in her temporary quarters that night, the pin beside her on the desk, her case files stacked like bricks. A knock came at the door. She turned to find her attorney. "They've requested you appear for public congressional testimony," the lawyer said. "You have the right to decline." Anna looked down at the pin, then back up. "Tell them I'll be there." The tribunal chamber was silent enough to hear the hum of the air vents above the recessed lights. The walls seemed to lean inward, pressing down on the rows of officers and civilian observers who filled every seat. Anna Hurley stood in her uniform once again, hands clasped behind her back, eyes forward, neither defiant nor afraid. The scent of burnt coffee and cold metal hung in the air like residue from a fire long extinguished. Across the room, Admiral Ray Edwards sat in the observation deck, no longer in uniform, but his gaze stayed fixed on her like a compass locked to its true north. The lead adjudicator, Vice Admiral Mendez, cleared his throat and adjusted his microphone. "This tribunal has concluded its final deliberations," he said, voice steady but heavy. "The matter of Lieutenant Anna Hurley, accused of violating federal espionage statutes and Article 106A of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, is now at vote." A screen flickered to life on the wall, 4 names listed vertically beside blinking indicators. 2 for guilt. 2 for innocence. The numbers burned bright red against the dark background. Ray leaned forward, elbows on his knees, every muscle in his shoulders tensed. A tie meant a deadlock. And a deadlock meant the Secretary of the Navy would make the final ruling, a man Ray already knew had no appetite for heroes who embarrass the system. Anna didn't flinch. She just watched the blinking lights, her breathing measured, steady. "Proceed," Mendez said softly. The first vote came from Rear Admiral Fallon, guilty. The light turned crimson. The second, from Commander Price, innocent. A soft gasp rippled through the room. The third panelist, Captain Owens, hesitated, thumb hovering over the terminal before pressing guilty. And finally, the youngest member of the tribunal, Lieutenant Briggs, pressed innocent. The board froze 2-2. A draw. For a long moment, no one spoke. Mendez folded his hands, his expression unreadable. "The tribunal stands divided," he said. "As per protocol, this case will be escalated to the Office of Naval Adjudication for final." His words cut short when one of the courtroom technicians at the rear gasped audibly. "Sir, you need to see this." All eyes turned as the technician scrambled to project something onto the side monitor. "It's a live intercept. It's coming from an internal frequency. Ray's heart kicked against his ribs. The screen flickered, static filling the chamber before resolving into a data feed, coordinates, timestamps, packet routes. Then came a voice, grainy but unmistakable. "This is Captain Nathan Dunhill. If this signal is being received, then my cache has been found. What you're reading are my final logs, the ones I hid before they burned my access." The room collectively held its breath. Anna's hand twitched slightly against her thigh, but she said nothing. The recording continued. "Lieutenant Hurley is innocent. Every move she made at my instruction. She found the leak. She wasn't the leak." The data feed scrolled in tandem with the voice, displaying digital maps of deployment routes, falsified orders, and authentication trails leading back to the NATO Intelligence shell company. "They used me. And when I tried to undo it, they used her." The voice broke slightly, the faintest sound of resignation bleeding through static. "If there's still anyone in this command who remembers what duty used to mean, protect her." The feed ended abruptly. The room stayed frozen in stunned silence, even as the system beeped twice, verifying the encryption key matched Dunhill's signature ID. Mendez turned to the tribunal board, his hand hovering over his mic. "Panel members," he said quietly, "you are authorized to reconsider your vote in light of new evidence." The officers glanced at one another, their earlier certainty dissolving into collective doubt. One by one, they turned back to the console. Fallon went first. He looked at Anna for the briefest second, not apology, not empathy, just recognition, and pressed innocent. The red light blinked to green. The room exhaled as though the walls themselves had released tension. Mendez looked down at the terminal and said, "By majority decision of the tribunal, the charges against Lieutenant Anna Hurley are hereby dismissed. All records of indictment are to be expunged. Lieutenant Hurley, you are cleared of all accusations." The courtroom erupted in a chorus of murmurs, some relieved, some furious, some stunned. Anna didn't react, not visibly. She just stood there, chin high, the faint tremor in her hands betraying the storm she kept inside. Ray, from the upper level, closed his eyes for a brief second and breathed out. The girl who had stood barefoot in the rain 20 years ago had survived the storm again. When the room finally settled, Mendez cleared his throat once more. "In addition, Lieutenant Hurley, the Department of the Navy has authorized a full pardon and reinstatement of your commission, with promotion eligibility restored. You are also being considered for commendation for service integrity." He paused. "If you choose to accept." All eyes turned to Anna. Her silence stretched like a live wire across the chamber. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm but colder than the metal around her. "You listened after you broke me," she said softly. "You only cared once the world was watching." The words hung in the air like frost. "I'm not giving you what's left." Mendez blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. "Lieutenant," she cut him off. "No. I resign." Her attorney tried to whisper something, but Anna's stare silenced even him. "I won't stand under the same flag that allowed this to happen," she continued. "You want a hero to pin your guilt on. But heroes don't wait for permission to do what's right." Her voice never rose, but it carried, reaching even the uppermost row of observers. "You can have your ranks, your ribbons, your ceremony. I've already served something greater." The brass pin on her collar caught the light like a signal flare. Ray rose quietly, watching her descend the steps toward the exit. Each footfall sounded deliberate, unhurried. The room parted for her, officers stepping aside instinctively. Not out of order, out of respect. Mendez watched her go, the echo of her refusal still ringing in the air long after the door closed behind her. Outside, the corridor was lined with press aides and junior officers pretending not to stare. Anna stopped halfway down the hall, removed her cap, and exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. Ray caught up to her, hands in his pockets. Neither spoke for several seconds. Finally, he said, "You just turned down the Navy." She gave him a half-smile. "No. I just turned down permission to keep my conscience." He studied her, the fatigue under her eyes, the strength that somehow hadn't faded. "You know they'll rewrite this story," he said. "They'll call it a procedural error or a lucky break." She shrugged. "Then let them. Truth doesn't need their approval." She looked at him then, really looked, and said quietly, "You believe me when no one else did." "That's enough." He opened his mouth to answer, but she was already walking toward the exit. The camera lights outside the building flared the moment she appeared. Shouted questions flew like bullets through the air. "Lieutenant Hurley, what happens now? Are you going to speak publicly? Do you plan to sue the Navy?" She stopped on the steps, the afternoon sun catching her face, the brass pin glinting one last time on her collar. She didn't look at them, but her voice carried over the crowd. "I don't need revenge," she said. "I need reform." The cameras kept flashing, but Ray noticed the smallest thing. Her hand brushed the pin before she slipped it into her pocket. It was no longer evidence. It was no longer a symbol. It was simply hers. The same token given to a 6-year-old girl who had once dared to say she'd serve, and who had ended up teaching an entire institution what service really meant. That night, in a quiet motel outside D.C., Ray watched the news replay her tribunal statement on a loop. Commentators called her reckless, defiant, brave, dangerous. They missed the point entirely. She wasn't trying to be remembered. She was trying to remind them. The last image before the segment ended was of her walking away from the courthouse, sunlight behind her like fire. Ray turned off the television. The room went dark, save for the faint glint of the brass pin resting on the table beside him. She had slipped it into his hand as she passed him in the hall. He picked it up slowly, running his thumb across its surface. "You were right, Anna," he murmured. "Good officers don't follow orders. They follow the truth." Then he smiled faintly. "Guess I finally outranked myself." Would you have taken the pardon and gone back, or walked away like Anna, knowing freedom sometimes means letting go of everything you built? Share your choice in the comments and subscribe so you don't miss where Anna learns that walking away doesn't always mean the fight is over. The rain started just after sunrise, soft, cold, and persistent, as if the sky itself was trying to remember how to grieve. The base was quieter than usual, its usual hum of activity dulled by the storm and the aftermath of the tribunal. Anna Hurley stepped out of the side entrance, flanked by no press, no brass, no fanfare. She wore a civilian coat over her uniform, hood up, eyes low, her exit as quiet as the system had tried to make her existence. But for once, silence wasn't something done to her. It was something she chose. Behind her, the institution still buzzed with its own damage control, shifting narratives, redacted memos, and whispers in hallways that avoided her name. They would spend months rewriting the ending of her story, filing it under resolved anomalies and personnel matters. But none of that followed her into the parking lot where a single car waited. No black SUV. No escort. Just her and her memory. She didn't go home. Not yet. Instead, she gave the driver an address few people would recognize, one that hadn't been logged in her file in over 2 decades. A small train station just outside the Virginia coast, old, unrenovated, but still running twice a day like it always had. It looked the same as it did 20 years ago, when she had stood on that wet platform, barefoot and furious. Only now, the girl was gone, and in her place stood something forged not in fire, but in silence. Anna stepped out under the rusting metal awning, the platform slick beneath her boots. There were no soldiers here, no commanders. Just a couple of passengers waiting quietly for their trains, and a vending machine humming like a lullaby in the corner. And on a bench near the edge of the platform, sitting with his coat collar turned up against the wind, was Admiral Ray Edwards. Or rather, just Ray now. He looked up when he saw her. No salute. No title. Just recognition. And maybe, if one looked closely, the smallest hint of relief. She walked toward him, hands tucked into her pockets, rain collecting on the shoulders of her coat like medals she no longer wanted. Ray stood as she approached, but didn't speak. She stopped a few feet away, letting the silence linger. The past 2 decades stretched between them like a bridge built one impossible moment at a time. Finally, she reached into her pocket and pulled something small and familiar into the open air. The brass pin. She held it gently between her fingers, studying the way the light hit the metal, worn now, scratched, but still whole. Then she stepped forward, and for the first time since this entire journey began, she knelt. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't for show. It was quiet, reverent, a child returning something sacred to the one who'd unknowingly started it all. She placed the pen in his open palm and looked up. "It got me here," she said, voice soft but clear. "But it doesn't belong to me anymore." Ray's throat tightened. He hadn't expected this, not from her, not here. The brass pin felt heavier now than the medals he'd once worn on his chest. He crouched beside her, rain soaking through the knees of his slacks, his breath visible in the morning chill. "You carried it longer than I ever did," he said. "And you made it matter more than I ever could." She smiled faintly. Not in pride. In peace. For the first time in years. Ray stood again and offered her a ride, the keys to the government-issued sedan in his hand. She shook her head, gently pushing his hand back. "No," she said. "I have my own path now." He nodded slowly, not disappointed, not surprised. Just respectful. They sat together for a few minutes longer, listening to the hum of the rails and the quiet shuffle of strangers moving through the station. The past didn't hang over them like a burden anymore. It rested at their feet like a folded flag, honored and complete. "What now?" Ray asked finally. "What comes after walking away?" Anna looked out across the tracks, her gaze far off and sharp as ever. "I'm starting a task force," she said. Civilian-led. Focused on intelligence oversight, whistleblower protection, and systemic accountability. No ranks. No chains. Just truth. She turned back to him. "If they won't fix it from the inside, I'll build something that holds them accountable from the outside." He gave a short laugh, not mocking, but impressed. "You really are dangerous, you know that?" She raised an eyebrow. "Only to people who think silence equals loyalty." His smile faded into something more serious. "They'll come after you again." "Let them," she said. "I'm not hiding anymore." A whistle sounded in the distance, a train approaching, its engine echoing like a memory. She rose to her feet, brushing water from her coat. The brass pin still sat in Ray's hand, glinting under the dull light. He looked at it once more before slipping it into his pocket this time, not as a symbol of command, but as a reminder of consequence. Anna didn't look back as she stepped toward the platform's edge. The train slowed as it pulled in, doors hissing open like a held breath. She boarded with quiet confidence, choosing a seat by the window, her silhouette framed by fog and steel. As the train pulled away, Ray stayed where he was standing under the rain, one hand in his coat, the other hanging loose by his side. He watched until the train disappeared into the distance, swallowed by the trees and the storm and time itself. Then he turned and left the platform, not with regret, but with something closer to reverence. The girl who once promised to serve had done more than keep her word. She had become the standard by which service would now be measured. And she had done it not with orders, but with truth. The first snow had started falling when Ray Edwards opened his mailbox. It was the quiet kind of snow, the kind that didn't announce itself, didn't swirl or stick, just floated gently through the morning air like a reminder that the world still turned. His street in Alexandria was calm, the houses lined like disciplined sentries, each roof capped in white. The mail sat bundled in his gloved hands, bills, a holiday flyer, and one small brown parcel with no return address. He didn't need a name to know who it was from. He took it inside, removed his coat, and set the package on the table. The house was quiet now, not because it was empty, but because he had finally stopped filling it with the noise of things left unsaid. Since stepping down, he'd kept a low profile. No interviews. No books. Just long walks, strong coffee, and letters from people who still believed in the institution he had once fought to protect. He reached for the box, thumb running along the edge of the tape. It wasn't heavy, but something about it carried weight. He sliced it open with a letter opener, lifting the flaps slowly, like uncovering a memory. Inside, cushioned by soft black fabric, was a small wooden frame, polished, minimalist, perfectly centered. Within it, the brass pin, gleaming under protective glass. Beneath the pin was a single white card, its handwriting neat and deliberate. For the next child who needs to believe she can make it. H. Ray stared at it for a long time, his breath catching for reasons he couldn't name. It wasn't just a token anymore. It was a story, one written in courage, defiance, and the kind of clarity most people never find, let alone live by. He rose from his chair, the frame held gently in his hands, and walked into his small study. The walls were lined with certificates, medals, and commendations, ghosts of a life in service. But on a narrow shelf beside the window sat something new, a plaque, freshly mounted, dark walnut with gold script. It read, "Honor is not obedience. It's courage." Ray placed the frame beside it, not like an award, but like an answer. Then he stepped back, the snow continuing to drift outside the window, quiet and persistent. Somewhere out there, Anna Hurley was moving forward, not as a decorated officer, but as something harder to define. Something more. And he had no doubt she would never stop. He thought back to that moment on the platform, not the one months ago, but the first time, 20 years earlier. A barefoot little girl with fire in her eyes and rain in her hair, standing in front of a man who had once thought rules mattered more than instinct. She'd made a promise that day. "I'll be a naval officer someday." He hadn't laughed to mock her. But still, he'd laughed. And she had remembered. Ray stepped back into the kitchen, poured himself a cup of coffee, and leaned against the counter. The house creaked softly, a winter groan through the beams, but otherwise, the silence held. He turned the card over, nothing on the back. Just that one line, left like a map for someone else to follow. For the next child. Not the last. He didn't know where she was now, not exactly. News reports said she had started something, a civilian-led task force investigating military ethics violations and covert intelligence abuse. It wasn't glamorous work. It wasn't funded by big names. But it was real. And it was growing. Ray had seen the press conferences. Sparse attendance. No headlines. But the right people were watching, and the wrong people were sweating. Her voice, calm and composed, broke through static like it always had. She didn't lead with outrage. She led with facts, receipts, history. And people were listening. The plaque beside the pin caught the light as the snow brightened the room. It had taken Ray most of a career to understand the difference between loyalty to orders and loyalty to principle. Anna had understood it before she could even tie her shoes. He thought of all the recruits who would walk into training halls, repeating creeds they hadn't lived yet. Maybe one of them would see her name one day, not as a footnote, but as a foundation. He placed the frame back on the shelf, then turned away, the image seared into memory. The pin had come full circle. But its story wasn't over. It was just waiting for the next hand brave enough to hold it. Outside, the snow deepened. Inside, the truth remained. She said she'd be an officer. She became something more, a reckoning. Thank you for listening to this story until the very end. There's another interesting one on your left screen that I think you'll really enjoy.